happy to me is very different than happy to you.
Right.
And for the record, happy to me was very different than happy to my second husband.
Yes.
And yet, I didn't know what would make me happy.
Yeah.
And so it's that space of I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing because one, I don't know that I'm not happy.
Right.
And I don't know what would make me happy if I realized I wasn't happy.
Right. Welcome back to the What Went Wrong podcast, where we tell the untold stories of bouncing back from failure. I am your host, Tabitha Threll, and today I want to welcome my guest, Babs. She is a TEDx speaker, author, spiritual, and trauma coach. And guys, I want you to buckle up because her story is so powerful and so enlightening that I want you to, if you're listening in your car, if you're listening while you work out, make sure that you can replay this and really soak up her story. Okay. So we all know, Babs, all your accolades, all the things that you've accomplished, we all know that you did not start there. So tell us what went wrong.
Tabitha, thank you for having me today. And to your listeners, welcome to this conversation. And I hope that that's what this is, not just a listening session, but a conversation. So, first and foremost, before I jump in and tell you all about what went wrong, I just want to invite you to kind of think about if you're driving, please don't close your eyes. If you're doing something important, please be safe. But put yourself into a comfortable position as if you were just going to sit down with an old friend and hear a story and share ideas because it's that space of sharing that we recognize the strength and the power within ourselves. And so, as I get ready to tell you today about one of my failures, um, it's actually one that I think so many of you have probably experienced in and of yourself, and that is a failed marriage. My second husband and I met uh, due to circumstances. I was really struggling with my health and with a whole bunch of other things, and I was really struggling to sleep. So I did what any logical, normal, rational person would be. I went out and I got a second job, and I was going to work third shift because if I was awake, someone was going to pay me for it. And if I was going to get paid to do work, it was going to be at a premium, and graveyard shift pays the best, right?
Yep.
So even though we're talking about setting up this story of failure, just know that, look, we can really be in command of those failure moments from the start to the finish, and they're still going to happen. But so working third shift, and I met the man that would be my second husband. And long story short, in the beginning phases, I'm going to share with you the red flags that I should have seen but was unwilling to see because of the circumstances surrounding me. So it was May 15th, and I met this gentleman. He happened to be my boss for this third shift position. Really nice guy. And by the 12th of August, we were married. So less than 3 months after meeting him for the first time ever in a very, work-oriented scenario, we were married. And we were married for 8 years. The first year, we made the commitment that we were going to get to know each other before we started a family because that was the practical, responsible thing to do, right? Well, in telling this story, it tells part of someone else's story. So I'm going to be very considerate, and I'm going to be very careful about how I share this story because in telling you my story, it actually affects him as well because he continues to go on and has had another marriage. But when we first met, we decided we were going to spend that first year getting to know each other. And at the end of that first year, on our first anniversary, I'm in the bathroom. I'm getting ready to go to dinner, right? We've got a really nice dinner planned out and Fort Myers Beach, Florida, really nice place reserved. And he sticks his head in and he says, "Hey, I just want to let you know, I know we talked about starting a family, but I don't want one."
Did you know the number one way to build wealth is through real estate? Have you always wanted to buy your first income property, but you didn't know where to start? Join my group, Legacy Wealth Builders, where we will teach you how to buy your first income property and then keep your wealth by teaching the success and wealth principles to your kids. Because it's not just about building your wealth, but it's about keeping it for generations to come. So click the link, join our group, because for the month of June, the group is free. So get all the training you need and join the group now.
And so on the 1 year anniversary of my marriage, my entire world shifted because of all the things that I wanted in life. I had always grown up wanting to be a mommy. I wanted a family. I'm one of 15 children.
Wow.
And while I raised many of my siblings in conjunction with my parents, it was something I had always wanted. And so this news, and yet I did what I had been trained to do. We went to dinner and we had a wonderful time. And I didn't express my disappointment or my sadness because I wasn't quite sure how. And I didn't know that I had the worth or the value in his eyes for it to have any importance to him. And so shortly after that, fast forward 6 to 8 months, we get a knock on the door, and it happens to be law enforcement looking for my husband who has child support payments that are so in arrears, they want to offer him residence at the local jail. Much to my surprise, for a man who had just a few months prior to that told me he didn't want a family, I'm now finding out that he already has at least one, which wound up turning into three other children with three other mamas. And what a wonderful revelation that was. I say now, at the time, I was devastated. Obviously, throughout the course of that 8 years of marriage, there were a lot of things that I didn't address and I didn't respond to. And part of that was because I didn't feel like I had a place or a right to, even though it dramatically impacted the life that I thought that we were going to have together. Fast forward to that 8th year, end of my story with him is I'm literally laying on the floor in the bathroom my very first night of chemo. And as he had a knack of doing at inappropriate times, he sticks his head in the bathroom door and says, "Hey, I just want to let you know I'm leaving. I can't do this." And my first thought was, well, the doctor said it'll pass in a couple of hours. And yes, we'll have some time where we're going through this. So I just said to him, sweetie, it'll pass in a couple of hours. I've got this. I'm a strong, independent woman. I can handle this on my own. And he says to me, no, 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 you don't understand. I'm leaving you. Our marriage is over.
Mm.
To be honest with you, in that moment, I was too tired, too devastated, too overwhelmed, and too sick to give a damn. And so I set about, trying to find some even ground for myself. Through the process of our separation, we attempted counseling, which he chose not to show up to. So ultimately, I made the decision that if divorce is what he wanted, then he needed to take those steps because I didn't believe in divorce. Again, so much of what had transpired over the previous 8 years wasn't in alignment with who I thought I was or what I thought I wanted in life. And yet I had this really stark belief against divorce. I'd made a commitment. And so, long story short, that divorce happens, it comes about, and I'm done with relationships. Raise your proverbial hand if you've ever been in that situation at the end of a relationship, divorce or otherwise. Never again will I open myself up to another relationship. Period. I also recognized, even in that moment, that I was doing the same thing with my friends and my family. I was closing off because if I wasn't good enough to keep this marriage going, even in all the sacrifices that I had made for what I thought I wanted and believed, for his happiness, if I still couldn't keep it together, I didn't have any business being in any relationship. of any kind. So many of us have been there in failed relationships. And we look at those failures and we take them very personally. We think about our worth. We think about our self-awareness. We think about our intelligence. I mean, who I always considered myself a pretty intelligent woman. And yet to marry someone less than 3 months after you've met them, to not have these qualifying conversations, not that it is a judgment on the other person about who they want or what they want in life, but if you're not in alignment, and yet I hadn't had any of those conversations before making such an important question or a decision. So fast forward a little bit. How do we bounce back from that kind of failure? Because it's devastating, especially when you think about, I'm not the only one that when a relationship ends, you're in the midst of all kinds of other muck and mire, because usually you're smack dab in the middle of life just imploding when a marriage comes to an end specifically. So I took some time to figure out me, but I was figuring out me from a health standpoint, not an emotional standpoint or a mental standpoint or a spiritual standpoint. And then God does what God does so well. And as I refer to God, I'm just going to give you a couple of definitions because I want us to be able to understand each other. For me, God is divine mind, divine idea. And let me tell you this, at that moment, God was not divine in any way in my thought, because why would God bring this man into my life and ask me to make this lifelong commitment only to rip it away from me? And that's what I believed was happening, is that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So God's taking this marriage away from me because I'm not worthy of it, even though it wasn't anything like what I wanted. So as we go forward a number of years, actually, God introduced a man into my life from a work perspective again, but he wasn't my boss this time. So that was at least one good red flag that wasn't showing up. I had no intention of having a relationship. I had a health scare that had come back into play. And one of the things that I realized was that I had absolutely no idea what makes me happy.
Mm.
So, how could I be in a relationship with another person, whether it be a friendship or a romantic relationship, whether it be a work relationship, or just a stranger on the street? I was so closed off because I didn't know who I was. I didn't know what I wanted. I thought I did, but what I realized is I was operating from a foundation of borrowed belief,
Mm.
not conditioned thinking, not programmed. Don't mistake the two to be the same. We think about conditioned thinking. Conditioned thinking is what our parents, our teachers, our friends, and it's a natural thing. It's not a purposeful, malintended activity. Our thoughts are conditioned by the people we are around. And as we're growing up, it's much more formidable than when we're adults because we're unaware of it. And then we get to be adults and we remain unaware of the condition and the thought that surrounds us, and the importance of making sure that we're paying attention to that because it affects who we become and who we are. That what happened for me was I began to question absolutely everything I believed. If I believed the sky was blue, I wanted to know why. And I wanted to know what blue meant and what is the sky. And it sounds really simple and silly to ask questions like that when the totality of your life seems to be in ruins. My health was bad. My relationship was ending. I was pulling away from friendships, work relationships. I was mailing it in at the office. Again, raise those proverbial hands if you've ever felt that space and just sat in it. And the longer we sit in it, the harder it is to step out of it. And yet I was blessed to have a moment of clarity that helped me to recognize I was thinking I was in the middle of having a crisis of faith, right? No, what I was doing was I was having a crisis of belief,
Hmm.
beliefs that I thought I had carried for generations,
Yeah.
and even carried forward from previous generations. At this point in my life, I'm recognizing that none of them resonated with me. And so many of those beliefs were actually condemnation. They were fodder for me to self condemn, as opposed to stepping stones to help me step out of the muck that I was sitting in that moment. And so the first step for me was, and at that time, at that point in my life, I couldn't have said, oh, I'm going to become more self aware.
Right.
But what I did know that I needed was I needed to be asking some questions I hadn't been asking. And so as I look back on it, what I recognize is that that first step was becoming aware of who I was and what I wanted. And were they my wants or were they borrowed wants from people, expectations of those around me? Our parents want us to have a good career. They want us to have a good family. They want grandchildren, whether we do or don't. And now, mind you, again, I did.
Well,
But
Babs, can I ask you this?
no,
Just because you said something about the borrowed belief versus the conditioned belief.
yeah.
How do you know that that wasn't conditioned? Because it sounds like your parents were married and had a lot of children, and you
Mhm.
wanted to have a happy marriage, no divorce, and have children. So, how do you distinguish the two?
Well, to me, conditioned thinking is a buzzword in the marketplace that we use to quantify and classify why we believe something we believe. We've been conditioned to believe it.
Right. Yeah, like it's something that's been innate, usually since birth, of some, a lot of like religions and things like that. Like you will believe this and this. And
Exactly.
so I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And then borrowed belief would be you see something that you like and then you believe it to be true, or elaborate there.
Very great question. And I appreciate the distinction because borrowed belief is taking those conditioned beliefs
Hmm.
and owning them
Okay.
without purpose, reason, or understanding.
Right. Okay. So you have that belief, like taking that on, like, no, this is what I actually believe. It's not just something somebody told me. I truly believe this right now in my
It's not
consciousness.
even a truly believed. We believe it.
Okay.
And the distinction's important
Right.
because I believed that the only way for me to be successful is to have a happy marriage,
Okay. Gotcha.
is to be successful in my career. Well, what's happy in a marriage? What's
Right.
success in a
Yeah.
career? So a borrowed belief for me is this idea of something that, okay, well, yes, this is the upbringing that I had, but then I allow it to continue carrying it forward because my belief is that that's part of who I am or who I'm meant to be. And I'm borrowing it because I haven't had the experience of happiness. It's borrowed because in that marriage, for 8 years, I now can be honest because of self awareness. I can come back and I can say, I wasn't happy.
Right. Right.
And I knew literally from that 1 year anniversary on
Yeah.
that I wasn't happy.
But if you would have
And yet,
admitted that before, that would have been saying, oh, this marriage could fail and I won't be successful. And then I really won't have happiness. Correct. And I
right.
think that's what a lot of people do, our listeners. It's like we continue to do something because we think it's going to bring us the happiness, the fulfillment, the success. And deep down, we know it won't. But it's like you said, that
We don't
belief
know
that,
how to do it differently.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, we just don't know how to do
Yep.
it differently. And we don't know how to do it differently because the borrowed beliefs that we've been operating on are coming from people that have done it the way that we thought we were supposed
Right.
to do it.
Right. And they might have had success in that. Like your parents,
Exactly.
like if they had a happy, healthy marriage, that's honestly probably why you believed it, because you see that and you think, oh my gosh, this is what it's supposed to be. And I think we see that now more than ever with social media. We see something that looks the way that we want it to feel or be for us. whether we
Right.
know the truth or not. Like you said, you're going to believe what you believe, whether it's the truth or not. And
Yep.
so then we take that on, but not saying, but me in this circumstance, me and my situation, it's different. And so the
Right.
outcome's going to be different.
Right. And it goes back to actually understanding what the belief is.
Yes.
And and taking that even deeper into, okay, well, I want a happy marriage. Well, what's happy?
Right.
Happy to me is very different than happy to you.
Right.
And for the record, happy to me was very different than happy to my second husband.
Yes.
And yet, I didn't know what would make me happy.
Yeah.
And so it's that space of, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing because, one, I don't know that I'm not happy.
Right.
And I don't know what would make me happy if I realized I wasn't happy.
Right.
Like, these are the commitments I've made. And so it's the old, you've made your bed, so now you get to lie in it.
Right. Yep.
And that was the mentality I was brought up with. You've made this commitment before God and everyone.
Yep.
So, I mean, I've even joked with this man, and said to him, as we were going to the justices of the peace less than 3 months after we'd met to get married, I don't believe in divorce. So if it comes to that point, just don't bring me divorce papers. Just bring a double-barreled shotgun, because one of us isn't going to make it out of that conversation alive. And it was a time and a day and age where you could joke about those things.
Right.
I would never joke about that now,
No.
just because of the tenor of our world. But that was my belief.
Right.
My belief was is that if I were to have a divorce in my story, I would immediately be a failure,
Right.
because divorce equals failure.
Right.
And yet I didn't know what made me happy. And so I wasn't about to make changes within the relationship, because I didn't realize that it was me who wasn't contributing fully.
Right. Because you weren't self aware. I think so many people, that's
Right.
why I always tell women, you have to date yourself first. Because if you don't
Yes.
know and love yourself, how can you invite somebody else who is opposite and different and they have different beliefs and different personalities? How can you expect them, first of all, to fully love you, the true you, right? Like not the one you just facade, like the real you,
Yep.
because they have to love the true you, or you do enter that marriage in a lie, which means you didn't vow because there's a lie. Like when you said your husband came and said, "Oh, sorry, I don't want kids. Oh, I have a family's over here." To me, I look at that marriage as like null and void. Like you came to the table with all these lies and all this, you might as well just had been still married to the other people, in the eyes of that. And so, but your perception of it is, but we made a commitment, so
Right.
those are two different beliefs. One doesn't necessarily let you off the hook, but it just looks at things in a way that is objective and gives you power back. Because I think so many women, we give our power away when we don't know who we are, where we stand, who we bring to the table of that relationship, and say, this is me. Now we change over time, but this is the true me. So you were figuring this out and you met this man at work, and obviously some things started to happen and you started to see like what you wanted out of a relationship. So kind of tell us from there, like what happened and what kind of awareness sparked that happiness that you figured out, like, yes, this is what makes me happy. This is what I believe in moving forward.
Well, here's the fun part of this bounce back story, because people will ask me, my husband's name is Tom now, and they'll ask me, so Babs, when did you know that you loved Tom? And I was like, the first time I really thought about the answer, it struck me, because my answer to that question was about 6 months after we got married.
Mm,
6 months after we got married. Because what I recognized was I had no blooming idea what love was
mm,
before I met this man. I had an idea of what love should be,
right.
and it's very different than what it actually is.
Yeah.
And what I recognized about him was that there was something about him I needed in my life.
Yeah.
And the only way to get that, and I'm just being really transparent
Yeah.
here. There's not for him. He tells a much different
Yeah.
story, and it's so much sweeter. But for me, it was like I need that in my life. And how do I get more of that in my life? Well, yeah, I could get married. Like we could do that, but it wasn't an easy decision for me to make.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I waited until the absolute last minute because I had to move across the country for this man, and I swore I'd never do that.
Right. Right.
Mama ain't leaving her home confines for a man ever again. And yet, what this man taught me from his example, not his words, was that my happiness was important,
Yes.
which meant I had to figure out what made me happy because I didn't have any idea. I'd spent the first 35 years of my life, so like so many of us do,
Mm-hmm.
making sure that everybody around me was happy. So much so that at the end of the day, I was too exhausted to care whether or not I was happy or what would make me happy.
Right.
Because as long as everybody around me is okay, that's my job.
Right.
But no, in this moment, I invite you into your life. If no one has done that, let's take this moment right here to bounce back together because you have the right to be happy and you get the opportunity to find you
Yes.
no matter where you are in life, no matter where you are in a relationship, out of a relationship, leading up to one. None of that matters. You have the right, you have the responsibility to determine who you are and what it is that you want out of life. And that starts with two things. One is being self aware.
Yeah.
What is it that makes me happy? And not just happy in the moment, because pleasing other people at that point in my life made me very happy.
Right.
But that's not sustaining. What is it that makes you happy in the quiet solitude moments when you're alone? When you think about your life overall,
Yeah.
what is it that brings joy to your thought?
And that's right there. I think joy, like happiness is great and you want to find that, but it's that deeper sense of joy of, you know, like you said, happiness is fleeting. Pleasing people can make you happy. Getting ice cream can make you happy. All of those things, like little things can make you happy. But what is that inner calling that just makes you overflow with joy, even in the storm of life, even when you're
Yes.
frustrated? Even people think that you can't be angry or frustrated and still feel joy. You can still feel joy. That comes from inside. That's like who you are. And it sounds like you may have had fleeting moments of happiness, even in the second marriage, but it
Yes.
wasn't anything that was sustainable. And obviously, your body was feeling that because I know we glossed over this, but you said, like you had chemo. So you had some things inside the body that was manifesting over time.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for people to correlate. I am a very um, big believer in your body manifests what's going on emotionally inside. And I am nowhere near an expert in this, but my own mother had an autoimmune disease, and there was a lot of emotional turmoil that I didn't realize as a kid, but I see that come out. And so you had these things kind of manifest. And one other thing I do want to point out to our audience, if you've been listening to Babs, she has said, my second marriage, and I don't believe in divorce. So I know some of you are asking this question, what happened in the first marriage? Okay. And we're just not for a sense of time. It deserves its own podcast and its own importance, but her first husband was murdered in a car accident. And so when she says that she doesn't believe in divorce, she truly lives this out. Like, this was something I know that when you came into this second marriage, it was like, okay, this first one, you had still had some issues with what went on with the first marriage. And that's something else that I know you brought into that second marriage and probably was
Right.
manifesting and not realizing, but I'm supposed to be happy, but I'm supposed to be happy. So I'm supposed to be happy. So I put on the smile and I'm married. I'm supposed to be happy. Right. But all this inside of
Exactly.
you is like conflicting. And I think, especially our women listeners, but even our men listeners, we have things in our life that we believe, and then we have things that contradict that. And when we don't address it, when we just gloss over it and say it's okay, that's when it can manifest into a lot of things like disease and cancer. It can be headaches and stomach aches or leg pain, or, what, just anger, these things that come about. And so what Babs is talking about is not just this flighty dighty happiness, like, oh yes, we're happy. This is like deep to the core. If you want to live a long, fulfilling, magnificent life that you deserve, you have to address this. And some listeners right now, you're feeling convicted. Like, this is meant to convict you a little bit, not condemn you. Like Bab said, she
Mm-mm.
was condemning herself. That's different. That's saying you're bad, you're horrible, no matter what, you're trash. No, 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 no. A conviction is saying, I know I'm doing something or not addressing something that is vital to not only my fulfillment, joy, and happiness in life, but the people around me. Because I'm sure when you met this husband and you finally fell in love with him and you knew what that meant, I guarantee everyone around you was like, who is this woman? Like, this Babs is like amazing.
Completely.
Like, where have you been our whole lives, right?
Completely. The person I am now today, after being married to Tom for 17 years, doesn't recognize the person I was for 35 years before I met him.
Probably not.
Would not recognize her on the street.
Yeah.
And you're so correct, Tabitha, about the idea of how our dis-ease
Mhm.
manifests.
Yeah.
When we are uneasy, when we are ill at ease
Yep.
in our lives, in our relationships, in the decisions that we're making, so often it manifests in our body,
Yep.
not as a punitive or a punishment, but
No.
as a calling card,
Yep.
as an invitation
Yep.
to show up for ourselves in a way that no one has ever invited us or told us that we are accountable to.
Yeah, for sure.
And so you're absolutely correct. When I began to recognize that what was going on in my body, what was manifesting in my body, was a sign, was a symptom, was a calling card, an invitation to look at the choices I was making,
Yep.
the environments I was putting myself in, the pressures and expectations that I had adopted from people around me. But at the end of the day, I didn't care about those expectations outside of it making other people happy.
Yeah.
And so this idea of being self-aware, we don't even that idea of feeling convicted is I want to encourage each of us, myself, Tabitha, you, your listeners, don't think of it as being convicted, but think of it as being invited.
Yes.
Because in our society, a conviction's a bad thing.
That
When
is
you're
true.
convicted about something, you're going to a not so
Yep.
good place.
Yep.
But if we think of that feeling and we rephrase that as an invitation,
Yeah.
it's a calling card to learn something new, to do something different. And here's one of the most two extraordinarily important decisions or ideas that I learned. One, I said this earlier, you've made your bed, so now you get to lie in it,
Yep.
correct? We've all heard it,
Yep.
especially our parents, our grandparents, generations. Big deal. You made a commitment, suck it up and stick it out. Put
Yep.
your big girl panties on, let's go.
Yep.
Well, I had this revelation one day as I was making my bed. I do it every day.
Yep.
I can make a different choice at any turn.
Yep.
And different, and here's the kicker, different doesn't make it wrong. It simply makes it different.
Yes.
Matter of fact, the day that I had that revelation,
Mhm.
I actually sat down. I was on a bunch of board of directors. I was overcommitted.
Mhm.
And that decision that I had been holding on to because I'd made all of these commitments.
Yep.
But that revelation, I make my bed every day. I can make a new choice.
Yep.
I can make a new decision. Actually freed it up to be able to make the phone calls to say, I'm choosing to step away from this activity.
Yeah.
And guess what? My stepping away opened the door for someone else.
Exactly. Exactly.
So that idea of conviction, let's be careful with that idea, and let's transmute that into an idea of it being a calling card,
Yeah.
because that calling card then takes us to the next step, because before we can forgive another
Yep.
or ourselves, we have to be accountable.
Yep.
We have to be willing to be accountable for the decisions we made. And accountable is very different than responsibility and blame.
Yeah.
Me being accountable said, yes, I made this commitment. Yes, this was the belief I made when I had it. Yes, circumstances have now presented where I get to make a different choice. And it is imperative that I do the work necessary so that making this choice new, I make it new. I don't make the same choice in the same way because I'm still operating on borrowed belief
Right.
as opposed to inner knowing, an inner sense of worth and value and understanding.
Yes. Yeah, no, Babs, I think that's fantastic. And I love using the word inviting over conviction. I think for me being if you're a churchgoer, you hear those two terms, but I do love saying like I'm inviting you into this. But here's the thing with an invitation. Like you said, it's the same with manifestation in your body. It's like I'm going to give a little knock, I'm going to invite you, and then I'm going to get louder and I'm going to get louder. And for some people, they have to bust the door down and drag them into it because
Right.
we just, like you said, it's a lot of things. It's your past experiences mixed up with your beliefs and your awareness. And like you said, when you're becoming accountable, taking ownership of what you did and saying, you know what? But things have changed and I'm going to own this and I'm going to take on whatever the repercussions of it, but I am no longer going to people please or take on so much. Again, it's like women, we just want to, yes, yes, I'll do this, yes. And it's like there is power in no, and you're okay with saying no. And some people have so many tore up beliefs about, well, no, I'm supposed to give, 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 give. And at the end of the day, you have to turn inward and be like, but what is this fulfilling for you? So I love all of that. Thank you so much for sharing your heart and where you're at today. Tell our audience like what you have coming up or where they can find you. We'll put all your social handles in the show notes, but is there any last bits of wisdom or anything you have coming up in your own? Because I know you're a spiritual and trauma coach and you have your book and all of those things, but is there anything else that you want to share with our audience?
What I would say is nothing makes me happier than when someone reaches out and says, I just need someone to sit with me.
Yeah.
So if you need that person, go to my website, check out my social handles. They're all my name spelled out, amylynnecarroll.com, Amilynne Carroll at Facebook, Instagram. I do have a new book out, but you know what? If you come across that and you want to read it, great. But more importantly, I feel like my calling in life is to be the travel partner for another that I needed when I felt really alone.
Yeah.
And so if you feel like you're in a moment of failure or an extended moment of
Yeah.
failure, and you just want someone to sit and listen, someone that's not going to think of you as broken or needing to be fixed, someone who's going to love you right where you're at. Because the reality of it is we cannot progress from where we're at until we acknowledge where we are.
Yes.
So we can't get where we want to be if we don't acknowledge where we're starting from.
Yeah.
So reach out. You can leave me messages, WhatsApp, it's all there. If
Awesome.
you need a travel partner that's going to love you where you're at, but see you for what you truly have the potential of being from our very first conversation, reach out. I'm here to listen and I'm here to honor you on your journey.
Awesome. Thanks again so much for giving so much wisdom and experience and just pouring your heart out. Guys, if you're listening and this resonates with you and you maybe someone in your life, if this inspired you at all, share it with them. I always say don't be a taker, be a giver. Just send the link. Say, "Hey, you got to listen to this podcast. We're on YouTube as well if you want to watch Babs and her expressions, because I always think you connect so much with people in their eyes, but just share this with somebody. You never know what somebody's going through as well. Like Babs said, when she was going through what she went through, people on the outside might have thought, oh, she's happy, she's putting on a good face, oh, they've been married, 4 years, 5 years, 8 years, they're happy. You never know when somebody needs to hear this message. And also, if you are going through a time right now, what you call the failure or the wrong time, stay persistent, because the
Yeah.
what went wrong will lead to the what went right. If you just stay true, stay persistent, tether yourself to people that will uplift you and make you better. Until next time, bye, guys.